It's time to talk the best and the worst of 2022. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today's video are my favourite reads from 2022, as well as those that I didn't enjoy so much. Before we jump into that, make sure you're checking the description box down below for links to my Discord and other social media, should you want to come along for the ride. Now for today's video, I have not gone through my Goodreads and gone, I gave all these books 5 stars, these are obviously my favourite. What I have done is had a look at my year of reading from the reading challenge. It's how I sort of track what I read during the year, and the things that don't come on there will be things like beta and alpha reads that I have done. But I've gone through and I've had a look at everything that I've read over the year. I finished my last read for December today, and I just wanted to get a feel of how I was feeling about those. So instead of going, here are all my 5-star reads and here are the books that I rated the lowest, I thought I would give different categories for the way that I felt about books at the time. So these will be my favorite reads for different reasons throughout the year of 2022. And likewise with the worst reads, honestly, I didn't read a bunch of bad books. I don't tend to pick up books that I really don't like. Even the ones that I'm a bit on the fence about, I'll normally err on the side of, you know, maybe it didn't work for me specifically, but it was still an okay read and I had an okay time with it. So the books that I have here, I've got 12 in my favorites, my books that I really enjoyed throughout the year, throughout different categories, and then I have 5 books that I just really didn't click with, but I finished anyway for one reason or another in 2022. We will of course start off with my favorites, and I'll go through each of the categories. Most category only has 1 book, and in the favorites, only 2 out of 12 were traditionally published, I think. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on that, we'll check again at the end. So a lot of these are indie, which brings me so much joy that the favorites that I've picked out for my whole reading year have been a lot of indie favorites. The first category that I have today are books that I judged too harshly at the time because they're still living rent-free in my head. These are books that when I read them, maybe I didn't give them even a 4-star when I read them, but I'm still thinking about those stories to this day, and I ended up going back and upping the rating. The first one in this category is A Touch of Light by Tiago Abdala. Now, this storytelling style, the execution, I didn't feel worked for me when I read this the first time through, but once I really did separate the characters and went through their stories as individual tales, it worked for me a lot better. I had some issues with repetition in terms of specific words that were used. In the first sort of half of the book, there'd be a word that was picked and it just kept repeating and repeating and repeating, and having a copy editor as a wife, that sort of thing stuck out to me. And then the stories felt a little bit jolted, but I'm still thinking about this book and I'm still really excited to see where Tiago goes next. In fact, book 2 is on my anticipated releases for 2023, so spoiler alert for that video. Moving on from there, like I said, there were 2 in this category, is Blood of the Spear by Mark Timoney. Mark Timoney has done something really special with this book, and when I picked it up, I wasn't used to some of the more dense storytelling style that Mark has in this book, but he has achieved something truly special in book 1 of a new series. Blood of the Spear has some epic world building and some really cool elements, some really cool epic fantasy elements, and I just can't stop thinking about it. I really like the monster hunting elements, I like the adventure that we're on, I like all the lore that is so rich throughout this tale, and I ended up going back and upping my rating of this one. So I'm really looking forward to what Mark brings out in this world next. I also read Starbinder, his novella, a little bit earlier on in the year, and had a good time with that as well. This world has so much more to give, and I can't wait to see where it goes. The next category I have is my favorite series of 2022. This is a series that I have discovered but not yet finished, and no one is shocked. Can you guess what it is? You picked it. World of Lunaria by L.L. McRae. This series has everything I love in an epic bundle. We've got dragons, we've got sky pirates and airships, we've got sassy female leads. It's just awesome. I fell in love with this series. I cannot wait to continue. I have read 3, with book 4 ISA high on my radar, or ISA, in 2023. Moving on from there, I've got my favorite completed series of 2022. This is a series that I started and finished within the same year and came out with a beautiful omnibus edition, the only thing I've purchased from the Broken Binding thus far, and that is Pillars of Peace by Tom Dumrell. This is a very low fantasy series. It would err on the side of historical fiction. I think it's marketed as historical fantasy. They're short, they're sharp books. They carry so much heart in the characters. There are twists and turns and political machinations. You never know what's going to happen next, and I had such a good time with this series as a whole. The entire trilogy comes in at just under 1,000 pages. Do yourself a favor. If you're in a slump of any kind and you like historical fantasy, this series will definitely help you get out of that. Moving on from there, I've got my favorite sci-fi read of 2022. I didn't really pick up a lot of sci-fi until I started a booktube channel, and I was branching a little bit more out into that genre. It's still not a genre that I'm wholly comfortable in. It does take more brain power for me to get into a sci-fi book as opposed to something like a historical fiction or a fantasy, but I have really enjoyed my time with some of the entries that I've read. My favorite for the year would have to be the SPSFC winner of 2021 to 2022, and that would be the S.A. Tholen's Iron Truth. This book has so much in it. The first half of the book is really sort of character studies. We get to know our separate teams of characters, and then it really comes together. And we've got some cool tech, some military stuff going on, and a lot of character development. This book was epic in every sense of the word, and it did take me a lot longer to read than most books because I needed that brain space, but I am really looking forward to picking the rest of this series up, hopefully in 2023. Next up, we've got my favorite prose of 2022, and that can be none other than Fangs of War by E.J. Doble. E.J. Doble is a 20-year-old author with this beautiful, philosophical, lyrical prose that is so vivid when you read it, and I was stunned by the beauty that came out of this book. Yes, it's a little bit more dense, it can get a little bit convoluted. Having chatted to the author and Doble then taking on those lessons, I'm really looking forward to what comes out next. I do have The Crescent Moon on my Kindle, which was a philosophical novella. I've not read it yet, but I can't wait. If this is anything to go by and they're just going to grow in the future as an author, I can't wait to see what E.J. Doble does next. Moving on from there, I have my favorite traditionally published book that I read in 2022. I don't have it here with me, but that was To Ride Hell's Chasm by Jenny Wirtz. This book really did pack a punch. It felt like I'd read a 7-book series in one 700-page novel. It was an adventure from start to end. The internal dialogue and conversations that were brought up within the book were excellent. This was a book that really made you stop and think and sit with the words and visualize, and it was just mesmerizing, and I had such a good time with it. It is one of the reasons that Jenny Wirtz is so on my radar for my foreseeable future. I'll be doing Cycle of Fire here in January, and eventually we'll be moving on to do the entire Wars of Light and Shadow series here on the channel. But if To Ride Hell's Chasm is anything to go by, I am so excited to read more of Jenny's works. Next up, I have my favorite series ending of 2022. This is a conclusion that I read. I did read this whole series, I'm pretty sure, this year. Maybe I started it last year and finished it this year. But the most epic conclusion to a series that I have read this year was Jade Legacy. It is book 3 in the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. Now, whether you enjoyed the series or not and you made it to the end, there is no doubt in my mind that the amount of thought, the amount of foresight, the amount of world building that Fonda Lee has achieved within this world was absolutely epic. It knocked my socks off. I could not give it less than 5 stars. The whole series takes over, the span of this family's lifetime, essentially, and there are quite significant time jumps between the 3, but Jade War, was that the first one? Jade City? Maybe Jade City was the first one, and we really are just looking at this family within a city. Jade War then expands it into the bigger world, and Jade Legacy takes it to another level, and I was so impressed by what Lee had achieved throughout those 3 books. And that is probably one I would read again at some point once it had settled a little bit in my head, to go back and get more out of it the second time. I've got 3 categories to go. The next one is books that I needed at the time in 2022. Now, everyone has ups and downs. I had a couple of really down moments in 2022, just where my depression came back and it was not a fun time for me. I had a lot of trouble reading during this time just because my concentration really wasn't there, and a couple of books came by at the right time and just sort of held my hand through a week or however long it was that was more difficult to get through than other periods within the year. The first one is going to be Waking Ursa Minor. This is by Helen Rye Peterson. This book is an epic adventure which is so accessible and the language is beautiful. Helen Rye Peterson has this prose style which sucks you in, but it's also not overly complicated to the point where you won't understand it if you do want to read it quickly, but you also are able to read it at a slower pace and get more out of it, which I think is just something special. This book really did help me through one of those weeks where I was just having a not real fun time in my head, and it was beautiful to experience and have that be, you know, a source of positivity in a time when I wasn't feeling all that positive. The next one I have for that category is Heliotrope. This is by Palmer Pickering. I read this when my grandma entered end of life stage and I was not paying attention to anything. Heliotrope is an absolute epic. It is a tale where you follow a character from start through to finish on an epic adventure. It is very character based. We build with our found family. If you like a found family trope, this is awesome. If you like plots that build with the world, you are going to enjoy this book. It was very much a character study and a character-driven book with our found family that we are traveling with from the beginning to the end, and there are of course events that happen, but the plot thickens with the family, and that was awesome. I had such a good time with Heliotrope. The magic was really cool. The found family was, you really did feel for these characters as you were going through the book, and it held my hand through a time in my life when I needed it. I just needed something easy to read, and it was, even though it was so epic in scale, it's very accessible, and you do feel like you're being, you know, handheld. It's very slow paced, it's very descriptive, but sometimes you need that, and I needed it at that time, and I thought it was brilliant. The next one I have is my biggest surprise of 2022, and that would be Zeke, The Rising by Naomi King. They are an absolute friggin' powerhouse of a human. The artwork is all done by them. The marketing, so Naomi King is an artist and a tattoo artist in their daily life, and they wrote a book, and they sing, and they act. Like, they can just do everything. This book knocked my socks off. It was such a fun fantasy romp, and if you like a little bit of steam, particularly steam within the LGBTQIA+ community, it's very accepting, very open, and yeah, it's you should read this book. It was so much fun. It was probably the most fun I've had reading a book in 2022. The last one I have is the most beautiful cover that I discovered in 2022, and I said this when I picked it up, I said this when I was reading it. It may have been my second vlog here on the channel, but the most beautiful cover of 2022 would have to be, I'm just going to take the dust jacket off, Heart of the Bloodstone by Felina Wood. This is absolutely gorgeous. That's printed on the naked hardback. I'm sorry if my oil from my fingers got all over it. This book was a gentler side of fantasy. It's called the Stone Tribes Book 1. We've got stone magic. We've got younger people going on not so much a quest. They get exiled and they have to sort of figure out their way from there, and they end up coming back to the town that they had left, and things ensued. There was a lot of soul searching in this book. It was, like I said, a gentler side of fantasy, and I thought it was lovely. Had a really good time with it, and a gorgeous cover that I still chuffed that I have on my shelf. So those were the best of 2022, which means we're at the worst. Now, like I said, I didn't have a lot of books to put on this list. I do have 5, and one of these is like so well loved in the friggin' book community that I'm unsure how this is going to go down, but I have recently unhauled it, and you didn't react too badly for that. The first one that I did not enjoy all that much this year was Man Fuck This House by Brian Asman. This was a bit of a twist on the haunted house tale. I think the book was only 250 pages, and basically a family moves into a haunted house, and the house possesses the mother of this house and basically becomes obsessed with this woman. And it was a fun take on the haunted house situation. It just got real weird and didn't make a whole lot of sense towards the end. There was one point where I did like laugh out loud. I think it was trying to be like a dark comedy horror, and some people are going to love that, but it just unfortunately didn't end up working for me. The next one that I didn't vibe with was the one that people seem to love, and the sequel has just come out. People are reading it and raving about it, and I'm like, but has he learnt anything from the first book, or has he just taken the praise and poo-pooed all the criticism and run with it? And that is Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. I thought this book was fine. I did not think it deserved the praise that it got. It didn't work for me personally. I thought that our 4 characters were basically carbon copies of other fantasy tropes and just like stuck into a book. And then it was about 300 pages too long, and it could have been edited down. Had it been edited down, it could have been a really snappy fantasy, but to me it was so drawn out and so similar to other things within the genre that it didn't really feel fresh at all to me. That's not to say that it's a horrendous book, it's just that to me it didn't really do anything different, and it was just fine. What I will say is that when you were reading it, it read very fast. It was a fun fantasy romp for the time that you were reading it in, but I just think for the amount of praise that it got, it did not work for me. And one of the storylines is like a little rapey, and not even a little, like it's just rapey, and I didn't necessarily appreciate it. That's me, that's my tastes. I didn't have a great time with Illborn, I just thought it was fine. Moving on from there, we have a book I've not heard talked about, and I read it for a NetGalley arc, and this is where a lot of my subscribers came in, and that is Silkfire by Zabay Allure. So I gave a review of this book, and I didn't realize that the author had gotten to a bit of strife on Twitter, and then lots of people came and watched that review, and I ended up getting a whole bunch of subscribers because I said that the book was a little, I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I can't really remember a whole lot about this book. I remember that it was very LGBTQIA plus friendly. That's what it was trying to be, but at the same time it was quite, in my opinion, derogatory towards those minority groups by trying to do too much too fast and not really having the thought process behind what being part of those minorities were, and the execution just wasn't there. There was one part in it which I thought was kind of offensive to trans people, and being trans myself, I'm a little bit sensitive to, I guess, that sort of material. And I can't remember it. I remember the main character like really annoying me and just being a lot, and not smart. It wasn't even like dumb for the sake of being dumb to continue on the story. They were just dumb. So I don't know, I didn't have a great time with Silkfire, and I've not heard anyone else talk about it, so I don't know what happened with that book or how much success it's had. The next one is going to shock absolutely no one, and that is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is not the book's fault. This is a me thing. It was not written for me. I don't enjoy fantasy romance most of the time, particularly not when it's predictable AF and aimed at a YA market. And that's what this book was. I read it for a vlog. It was a fun vlog to do. I did not enjoy the book, but it's not the worst thing I've ever read. So, you know, Sarah J. Maas fans, more power to you. If you like them, that's great for you. I'm not one of them. So that one got unhauled. I really didn't want to read this book. Every time I was picking it up, I was like, just choose one of them. And I hear that goes on for however many books are in the series. So, you know, I'll never know. And I don't care that much. The last one I have on this list is The Haunted by Carlton Mellick III, because it takes 3 of them to come up with quality books like this. I read this with Roger over at Rodgers Reads for a project we were doing in October. He vlogged it. Vlog was very funny. I'll link that down below. It was odd. It wasn't the worst abstract horror that I've read, but it wasn't good. And all I remember is that there were relations, there was some murmurings from that area of the body, and old mate had to like go in, like actually just put his full body in there, and there was like a town inside of this woman with latex monsters or whatever. I don't know. It wasn't good. Don't read it. Or read it and then tell me about it, because, you know, I just think that other people... No, I take that back. Don't experience it. It's all good. Those are my best and worst of 2022. What was your favourite? What was your least favourite? And why? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will. I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.